Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden, and welcome to part 2 of the interview Julia Ioffe and I recorded with Melania and Me author Stephanie Winston Wolkoff. On this one, you're going to hear Stephanie describe how she feels the Trumps destroyed her life, her professional reputation, and what drove her to decide not just to record her former friend Melania, but release the tapes of those conversations. And in the "you just can't keep up with the news these days, no matter how quick you are" department, in the short space of time since we released part 1, the Department of Justice announced it was filing suit against Wolkoff for breaking a non-disclosure agreement she signed while working for Melania, planning the inaugural, and subsequently as an advisor to her in the White House. The Department of Justice accused Wolkoff of breach of contract and breach of fiduciary obligations, and asked the court to transfer all money she makes from the book into a government trust. Now, this is a highly unusual move for the DOJ, to go after a former employee who is not privy to any sensitive intelligence, such as a John Bolton or an FBI agent like Peter Strzok. In those cases, a book would get reviewed by the relevant government officials in advance, just to ensure that no state secrets would be compromised. But in Stephanie's case, she had no access to any information of this kind. And she was also not an employee, but a contractor. What she does offer are many details that are just simply embarrassing to the first family, such as we discussed in part 1, those that reveal Melania to be remarkably indifferent to her role as First Lady and to the public in general. Wolkoff, for her part, responded to the lawsuit. She told Reuters that the confidentiality provisions ended, quote, when the White House terminated the agreement. Quote, the President and First Lady's use of the U.S. Department of Justice to silence me is a violation of my First Amendment rights and a blatant abuse of the government to pursue their own personal interests and goals, she said. She added that she will not be, quote, deterred by these bullying tactics. Then, after the AG filed suit, Melania herself weighed in, breaking her usual silence by posting a blog on the whitehouse.gov official site decrying her former friend. Melania dismissed Stephanie's revelations as, quote, salacious claims by a former contractor, end quote. The First Lady went on to insist that this friend of 15 years, quote, barely knew her, end quote, and, quote, someone who clung to her after my husband won the presidency. She concluded, quote, as a country, we cannot continue to get lost in the noise of negativity and encourage ambition by those who seek only to promote themselves. Okay, well, we had some interesting reaction to part 1, and I'd like to share a little of that before we start. Some of you question why we would bother to interview someone like Wolkoff. Or as one of you put it on Facebook, this is disgusting. Shame on you for encouraging this behavior and this woman. For all the complaints I have over rabid leftists, this is just as bad. Way to encourage the poorest, most knuckle-dragging activity between female. So we responded that we had no shame at all, that Stephanie knew Melania and the Trumps for 15 years. She worked on the inaugural and in the East Wing for another 18 months. We feel what she had to tell us is relevant and newsworthy, even if you don't like the source. At one point, she describes in the interview that she's kind of a bookend to Michael Cohen and that they both had these intimate relationships with the first family, and then both, of course, have turned against the family and written tell-alls because they certainly didn't like how they were treated. But that Facebook comment was about the most negative feedback we received. Most of you, like us, were interested in what we learned about this otherwise secretive and privacy-obsessed First Lady, like those rumors that Melania didn't really want Donald to win or to be First Lady. Well, those turned out to be dead wrong, as Stephanie revealed to us. And as a follower on Twitter pointed out, Melania, quote, does not differ on the issues from her husband either. They wrote, quote, to her, breastfeeding babies ripped from their mother's breasts are better off in Trump's camps than with their mothers. They are happy because, as Melania said in one of the recordings, they get shelves for their clothes. Well, whatever you think of Melania or Stephanie, you're going to learn more from part 2 in just a moment. Before we start, here's just a quick preview of upcoming podcasts that I think will be of interest. In our next episode, we're continuing this theme of memoirs by women who have fallen from high places. Caitlin Flanagan will join me in a discussion with author Barbara Emile, a.k.a. Lady Black. She's the author of a new and very juicy book called Friends and Enemies, A Life in Vogue, Prison, and Park Avenue. Barbara is married to Conrad Black, who is a former newspaper tycoon who took her to the very heights of London and New York society before he was stripped of his media empire and sent to prison and everything came crashing down. Barbara and Conrad are both originally from my homeland of Canada, and actually I've known them for many decades. So I'll have some of my own personal stories to tell. I don't think they'll be like Stephanie's. And then our podcast after that literally drops on election day, Tuesday, November 3rd. So we're going to hold a special, fun Femsplainers election party. And our special guest is going to be Susan Glasser, who is Washington correspondent for The New Yorker. She's also married to New York Times White House correspondent Peter Baker, and she's co-authored with him a new book about James Baker III, no relation, called The Man Who Ran Washington. So stay tuned for all that. Thanks as always to those who support us at patreon.com. And if you don't already, we'd really appreciate it. Your donations keep the podcast going. Just go to patreon.com/femsplainers. And for as little as $1 a month, you'll receive our exclusive subscribers-only Last Call episode, in which you get to ask our guests the questions, as well as many other benefits. So now, part 2 of our interview with Melania and Me author Stephanie Winston Wolkoff. And again, my co-splainer in this episode was Julia Ioffe of GQ magazine. If you're like me, you've gotten pretty used to shopping online lately for even very basic things like toilet paper or cleaning products. You probably don't get excited by deliveries anymore. Oh boy, dog food, again. But here's something you can order that will not just brighten your doorstep, but your home, yard, or patio for many years to come. A gorgeous shrub, tree, or plant from fastgrowingtrees.com. Best of all, home delivery allows you to skip the big box stores and head to fastgrowingtrees.com, the world's largest online nursery. No more waiting in lines, messy cars, and digging through a lackluster selection. Just go to fastgrowingtrees.com and choose from thousands of varieties of trees, shrubs, and plants, expertly curated to thrive in your area and delivered to your door in 1 or 2 days. Whether you're looking for shade, privacy, fruit trees, or just added color for your yard, every plant is shipped with a well-developed root system, ready to explode with new growth come spring. I've not only ordered a beautiful limelight hydrangea for my garden, because fall is actually the best time to plant, but I'm looking forward to stocking up on some houseplants for the winter and bring some greenery inside. So there's a better way to buy trees and shrubs and plants for your home and yard. FastGrowingTrees.com. Join over 1 million satisfied gardeners at FastGrowingTrees.com. Plus, the 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee means your plants will arrive happy, healthy, and ready for planting. And now, through November 15th, go to fastgrowingtrees.com/femsplainers for 10% off. That's 10% off at fastgrowingtrees.com/femsplainers.
There's the two of us and then everyone else with Team Ivanka.
Right. We'll talk about this division and where it arose from in their relationship.
Well, I do say it's palace intrigue because there is such friction, suspicion, deceit, dishonesty. It's mind-blowing actually, because there's so much enough for everyone to do and be that it's puzzling that Ivanka tried to control this narrative in the White House, again, which she successfully did, right? She's, again, apparently taking care of the world. But for me, the disrespect to the First Lady, and I don't care who you are, the First Lady of the United States is the First Lady of the United States, regardless of daughter, stepdaughter, whatever it may be. That's a position that, again, even when I was asked to produce the inauguration, to work on behalf of the First Lady of the United States, to me, it was an honor and a respect to that position. So Ivanka, as the daughter to the president, stepdaughter to Melania, felt that she had the knowledge and expertise that she and Jared took these positions and also used up these positions, budgets.
These were staff positions.
Positions.
That you wrote that when you got there, there's only a certain number of positions to go between both East and West, and that no one paying any attention to, or little attention to, what the East Wing staff needs were, even in the most traditional sense. Whereas Ivanka and Jared were snapping them up for themselves. But I want to challenge something on that, to be fair, if she had been Michelle Obama, if she had been Laura Bush, I don't see that this would have happened to them. It was as if she herself, and you described this so well, was not willing to assert herself at all. And people take their cues from how you behave. And the fact that she showed so little interest, you were, on the ground, as it were, but still it has to come from her. And she Ivanka had been on the campaign trail while she was in the Caribbean. She didn't really care. And so that gave Ivanka the opening to move in and take it, because nobody else was there, not just to protect her, but because nobody paid her the respect they might have another first lady who had been more involved.
You are 100% right. The respect is not there. And it's not there as far as supporting her in any other way except the residents. And that's where she, again, after that weekend with the movie, Ivanka using the residents, she put up that wall and said, there's no more executive residents just coming and going. It was no more.
And by that you meant that Ivanka and Jared were walking in and out. You said the movie, they screened a movie without her knowledge, and she finally got mad. But go back to the origins of this bitterness between them. Well,
I would see Ivanka at events that, and it was always cordial, she and Jared, but I never spent time together with them. But apparently, Melania did tell me that they used to have a nice relationship when Ivanka was growing up. It was simple, but it was nice. They would talk, but they didn't spend a lot of time together. They never did. And so all of a sudden, Ivanka, felt that because Melania wasn't there, and this is the point I wanted to say to you, is she did care, though, because she had asked me to interview all the staff positions while I was working on the inauguration. And in my mind, and she wanted this, was creating this like Lincolnian group of women, this bipartisan group of women that was going to work on this children's initiative that could make a difference with scientific evidence-based research, not just, so no one could dispute her, no one could attack her. That was important. The reality is that, the West Wing, including Ivanka had her chief of staff, she hired all of her people. We couldn't get from Melania one person passed. And if they weren't a Trump supporter, forget about that. Like, it was like, forget about their qualifications. They said they want the best of the best. They want the best of the best who like Trump. That wasn't what, again, we were East Wing, Melania and I, when we spoke about it, it wasn't about policy. It was about children. So there's this, again, I think that's important to point out, because Melania did want her group of the staff that she could have to. Now, did I interview people and have her hire them without her meeting them? Yes. But we were very limited to the amount of people. Ivanka had her relationships already inside. Ivanka already had Ryan Priebus, Katie Walsh, who were chief of staff, and already had the ability to control the staff positions, as well as the assistant to the president's, special assistants to the president's. Mm-hmm. And, without having that knowledge, we didn't, for her, again, there was no one standing there with a binder explaining to us where budgets came from, where, how things worked. Ivanka made sure, like you said, she was there from the beginning. Mm-hmm. So she asserted herself and her knowledge, with knowledge is power. And we talk about that, like how important it is to know what's going on around you.
So then why was Melania so resentful? I don't understand. If she didn't want to do any of this, and she didn't, and she wanted
to do it. She just didn't want to do it then. You see what I'm saying? Like, she wanted
it. She grew into it.
No, and I guys, I hear myself saying this and I'm like hitting my head like Stephanie, because again, in retrospect, I'm trying to talk to you as if I'm there.
Yeah. That's great.
But the reality is I know differently now, right? But at the time I believed, again, I was FaceTiming her and I was doing all of these things from her residence to it was uncontrollable, and no one wanted to share any information because Ivanka was controlling the narrative. I think it made her, but I was the feet on the ground. I didn't have power. And that's where Melania, when she would come to DC, she would walk on over to the West Wing and try and get something accomplished, like getting me a contract. I mean, I couldn't get a contract at all. They did not want me there because I was there for Melania. She would go over and have conversations with General Kelly. She would have conversations with Ryan. It's like everything that you've read, everything that I've put in there, and there's much more actually happened. So she doesn't have the power, Melania, that Ivanka wields. And that has been I think Melania's most, again, I think when she married Donald, and this is how I perceived it, was she knew who she was marrying, right? She knew a Trump is a Trump is a Trump. Who got to use that Trump, Ivanka
card.
So I have a question about her knowing who she was marrying. Did she understand that, infidelity was what she was signing up for?
I don't
you didn't mention the Hollywood Access tape and that dropping in October of 2016. And there was a lot of reporting and speculation that Melania heard the tape and wanted to leave Donald, and they renegotiated their prenup and blah, blah, blah. Do you remember what her reaction was to the Hollywood Access tape?
Well, she was supposed to actually be meeting with Anderson Cooper, and she reached out to me to have lunch. And I was expecting to find her, in the corner, like as any normal human being would be, with hiding from everyone. And I was late when I got there. She was radiant. She was smiling. She was laughing. I mean, again, I hadn't heard the tape yet. So in just knowing that someone's talking about your husband, it didn't matter if I heard it or not. I would have, like she said, she always says to me how different she is, that maybe she is not like everybody else, that she is not going to hold those things. She was perfectly fine, except what got across to me was that it was more about this was the first time that there was that pause of, could this ruin his chances of becoming president? That was
will this ruin our marriage?
Right.
Well, you spent a lot of time with the Donald, and you were with them at Mar-a-Lago, and
that we
saw him come in to Trump Tower when you were having tea with her. What was your opinion of him? And then as it evolved into willing to go and support his White House and create these inaugural balls.
So I have to tell you, it was always in passing, how are you? And he always remembered, like, I had a bad foot and how's this? And those type of things. So he is a showman, right? So he always put on a great smile. And I have to tell you the truth. It was like, it was nice to see him. Mm-hmm. He was just cordial to me. I would get a good smile. How you doing, Stephanie? And then we would move on. Mm-hmm. So I never had that one-on-one until that day in Trump Tower, when I was sitting at their dining room table, sitting with Melania, reviewing the invitations. And again,
this was after you won the election. So you were planning the inaugural at this point.
I'm sorry. This is when we were planning the inaugural. Yeah. And he walks in, and I have to tell you, I understand now why people believe what he says. Because looking back in that moment in time, I would have bet everything that he was telling me the truth in regards to not knowing who Rick Gates was and everything else that happened, that transpired during that conversation. To me, the way and then this continued because the interactions I did have, you're right, through the planning of the inauguration, I spent more and more time with him. He's so believable, without a doubt, doesn't even question if it's true or not, because in his mind, maybe he does think, I don't know what he thinks. It's actually quite frightening, because you as someone who's listening to this and you know otherwise, and at the time, unfortunately, I didn't know who Rick Gates was. I had just met, he was,
and he pretended he didn't know.
Campaign manager.
He
was his
pretended.
campaign manager.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
Right. So I knew he was the deputy chairman of the Presidential Inauguration Committee, but this is a man who I took a screenshot of afterwards when I realized the connection, and have still to this day on my desk with the two of them on stage wearing red ties, standing, 5 inches apart from one another. And he said, Rick Gates? Who's Rick Gates?
And he did this to you. And why would he lie about knowing him to you at that stage of the game? You're just planning the inaugural and he's on the inaugural committee.
Because at that point in the time, I already knew that there were things that I was questioning. And I had told Melania how uncomfortable I was in some of the situations I felt I was being put in. And I, again,
like prolific unaccounted for spending, for example.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. That's like, that was poetry.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and just the, you would think that you're planning inauguration and you'd be working with the chief executive officer. If you're dealing with Rick Gates, controlled everything. And there were a lot of things that were happening behind closed doors that didn't make sense also. Relationships, partnerships. And as you said, a lot of wheeling and dealing. And I just expressed to Melania that I couldn't get the information I needed. I couldn't move forward. I didn't know why we were tiptoeing around certain issues. I didn't understand how I didn't have a protected email, why it didn't concern anyone, that their safety and security didn't matter. There was just so much. So she told me when Donald came home that evening to tell him how I was feeling. And I did. And so, Donald called the chairman and had Rick fired. And I have to tell you, if the president of the United States says you're fired, you would think that the next day Rick was hired by Colony Capital and remained the deputy chairman of the inauguration.
So it was like a TV moment. It was a staged apprentice moment. He didn't get fired. That's
no.
funny.
And so when I was in the White House working, right after the inauguration, Rick stayed in control of the finances and the inauguration, but not under the Presidential Inauguration Committee. And he didn't come to all the meetings when Donald was there. He would hide, right? Apparently he wasn't allowed in them. He was at the White House all the time. And so I started, saying to Melania, some things here really don't look right. Melania said to me, because I knew they were preparing the Form 990, the Federal Election Committee, where they were going to submit the finances for the inauguration. And it was a year later almost. And I was like, what is going on? I mean, and there's so much more, but even Melania said to me, get a lawyer. And so I hired a lawyer in January when I was working in the White House because of the conversations.
Of 2017?
Of 2017.
But you stayed on for so much longer. Why?
Because I wanted to see the initiative through. And I promised my parents.
The childhood initiative that she ended up tossing and putting a cover on a Obama era thing.
Exactly.
You guys would be best.
Yeah, be best. And you put a lot of work in this and it just got tossed aside.
We put a year, but a year of intense work meeting with experts and therapists and just again, we didn't have a budget. So we figured out, okay, we'll make it a HS Health and Human Service. We'll work with them to put it up on the website. We found ways to work around making it, to make sure that this happened. Because there was no support in the White House. There was no budget. I have to tell you, it was really troubling to me. You think of the technology industry, we think of our kids with social media.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing for Melania, right? So when I was with the West Wing discussing the initiative and the addictive behavior, at the time, this is when all the experts came out and they said, we created social media. We know it's the pitfalls. We know how addictive we've made it. So we now want to let everyone know we know, and we want to fix this. So Melania and I spoke about it and said, look, great, let's actually invite these people. The First Lady of the United States is inviting you to the White House to discuss this and embracing the fact that you've come out to say, look, I created it. We know what it's done to the world. We want to make it better. The West Wing was like, no. That is the technology industry and we need their support. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, but why would you see that as not supporting them? Well, if they're financing things, do you think they want to be called out on? I'm like, but they are coming out themselves and say, so you see what I'm saying?
They also rely on this addictive behavior and the, feeding people's worst impulses. So I have another question for you. Until you were, thrown under the bus by these guys, you mentioned in your book that you're the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, and you recounted some of their really painful, horrific stories. Did you at any point question kind of the values of the people you were working for, the policies of the people you were working for, like seeing children in cages?
This is a terrible thing to admit. I didn't pay attention to what I was so hell-bent on making this initiative happen that it was such rhetoric and I didn't look at it as I should have. I got in this mindset that I was there to protect Melania and I was there to present an initiative on her behalf. And I didn't care what was going on around me. The reality is I thought by being inside and the proximity to her and to these people, I could make a difference. The reality is no matter how much good you want to do, no matter the fact that you're right or wrong or indifferent, you can't do anything in the inside or the outside. The Trumps are going to do what the Trumps want to do. Their cronies are going to do what they want to do. And if it isn't to their benefit, they're not doing it. And I don't mean emotional benefit. I mean financial.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this was another thing that struck me about your book. You said all these people who said Melania didn't want it. She didn't want Trump to run. She didn't want him to win. You said that wasn't true. She wanted him to run. She wanted him to win.
If and when he ran, she wanted him to go all the way. And she wanted him, again, if you're going to do it, you win at all costs. And that's who they are. And so when Fire and Fury came out, that big question was Melania crying that night? I mean, she made sure that I gave that response to the New York Times of she was not only not crying, she was much a part of the victory as he was, that she contributed to that. And I take responsibility for not standing up for those issues and not speaking my mind and really ignoring it and thinking that doesn't concern me. Again, even the Women's March, I didn't understand. Like, I was like, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I was really.
What did you think the Women's March was?
I knew that I knew what it was. I'm just saying I didn't stand up to the belief that even though I understood and I felt that way, but I was more willing to sacrifice everything that I believed in, not about politics, about my feelings towards what they were marching for. And I understand that. I was willing to sacrifice the right to help her be successful as the first lady, because I saw that as something that needed to be done. I wanted to be a part of the change. I thought I could change it. I thought I could change them.
So do you think she bamboozled you, or did you bamboozle yourself, or both?
That's I think there's a little bit of both. I do. I do think that I do think that Melania is one smart, tough cookie who knows exactly what she needs and wants. And she played me like a fiddle. And I accept that now. Before, the thought of that was like, there is no way, because I think back and I look at all of our conversations and the reality is when she needed me. She needed my experience. She needed my expertise. She needed my relationships. There wasn't anything I wouldn't have done. But I'm like that if you're my friend, I go out of my way for you. But now all of a sudden you're the first lady of the United States. Like, honestly, I don't keep going back to that, but she had no one. She knew exactly who I was. That is my Achilles heel, is my loyalty and my honesty. I mean, what got me severed from the White House was I kept running over to Trump Tower, telling Melania and Donald what was going on. And then I said to them at the bottom of the Potomac River. Like, literally, I said that.
what happens? You said that you are okay. I mean, you have joined a queue of people who have gone into that White House hoping either to do good or think they could manage it, like
be the adults in the room.
That were the adults in the room, and have left just like with their hands like running as if running from a house fire. And then mea culping themselves very publicly, as we've seen even someone like Michael Cohen do, the mooch. You say you're okay in terms of you can go back. Like, how do your friends, knowing liberal New York social circles, you said it was fine, but is it really? Is it?
So, thank you for coming back to that, because we left off and I did not answer that properly, because it's not that it was fine. It's that I was, when I called my friends in the beginning, I think this is important, the people in the industry to help me produce the inauguration, they all said to me, Stephanie, I love you, but I'm not going near this. I don't know how you can support this. I mean, they were very honest and vocal about it, but they all ended the conversation was, look, I love you. I understand that you feel so passionate about what you're doing, but I'm not touching this. And I was like, okay, but I kept going. When I came back to my industry, I sat down with Anna Wintour. I had lunch with Anna and I talked to her about how I felt about what I'd done and how that I was trying to understand at this point, I still hadn't understood everything about Melania, about Donald, or about everyone that was surrounding me. Anna's very honest about what's a good way to say this? Anna's just very honest, direct, and to the point of, it's not so easy that you just put your hands up and say, oh, I didn't know, right? You know what I mean? Like, It's not so easy just to say that. The importance is you take responsibility for your actions, which I know I have. And I still, I think, have to live a life feeling.
Is that what Anna said to you? Like, what were her wonderful Devil Wears Prada instructions to you?
I don't usually talk about those conversations. I mean, those, like the word, like really what I always
the advice, what did she say?
The advice was the importance of making sure that people understood who I was before, and having the next chapter of my life be one that recognizes that, but it would take time. I think it was more I was heartbroken because so many my friends told me not to do it, and they were right. And I knew they were right at the time. Also, I did, but I wouldn't have changed my mind in retrospect. Like now, if she asked me, obviously I would say no, but I still feel strongly that I would have done the same thing at the same time. My friends are my friends. And I think that's what you realize in life too, is I shut down. I mean, I really didn't leave my house for over 2 years. I didn't go to birthday parties. I didn't go to bar mitzvahs. I didn't celebrate with anyone. I stayed home. And I think that it's not so black and white for me because it's not so important to be back in or not back in. I think it was like, I just needed to come to terms with the fact that I really did give up my life for a bigger cause, I thought. And I just wanted to get my sanity back and understand it more than anything. Like, what did I do? Like, who was I? What was I thinking? But more, I guess, it took over my life. It took over so much that the reality is I didn't think about, am I going to get back in or not? I have my relationships and those are still dear to me. They never shut the door on me.
And your family, how have they?
I have to tell you, my husband, God bless him, I swear to God, and my 3 children have been through hell and back. And I feel terrible for what I put them through. And they still, and they couldn't, my 3 children could not comprehend what had happened. I'm so lucky. And I say this, in the acknowledgement with my husband, like, thank you for waiting until I got to the other side, because I was so, the betrayal was so deep, because it's more than just a friendship. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, for me, it was a bigger cause. It wasn't about me. And I think that's hard to get across. But my 3 kids have been patient. And again, they also understood we talk about everything. I mean, everything. I don't keep anything from the conversation with them. And so we're very open communication about everything that's happening. And by having, I think, with them, it helped us, help them understand my reality, and that knowing what you're getting yourself into, the importance of life lessons and taking responsibility for what you do. But they're so, now they're like, Mom, we're so proud of you. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. They're like, we're so proud of you that you did what you did. Do you know how many times we cried at night? Like, it's so, they ruined my life. I mean, the Trumps ruined my life. They took everything from me, emotionally, physically, economically. I've spent millions on lawyers. I'm involved in 3 different investigations. I have a grand jury subpoena. I mean, I'm the witness of these 3, but I have lawyers that I have to pay to give information on these people. I'm one of the leading people on the investigation with the United States Attorney General for the District of Columbia. It's my information.
Is this on the inauguration committee? This is cooperating with what happened with the money, right?
Yeah. And so I've been desperately trying to understand why people haven't asked, where's the other $80 million? Why haven't people, it's like the 26 million in Melania's friend. It was like, and again, that's what they're genius at. The Trumps, the propaganda machine at the White House, they create a narrative, and it's so powerful that people don't ask questions. It's saying Melania, she doesn't want to tell you. She's not going to tell you. They want you to believe what they want you to believe. And it's not true. And again, to prove yourself, if I didn't tape this, if I didn't have on tape that Melania knew about what was going on behind everyone's back, but that they knew about, then who would believe me? Right? Mm-hmm. It was my innocence, that it was my life that they literally discarded as if it meant absolutely nothing. And it didn't to them, and it doesn't.
And that's when you decided to tape her. What made you decide to release it?
Well, I have to say, the White House kept attacking me. Stephanie Grisham, the communications director, kept, and speaking on behalf of Melania and also on behalf of Stephanie, they kept saying that I was lying, that I was delusional, that I really didn't do any of these things. I didn't hold a position. I wasn't Melania's friend, like on and on and on. And I said, they really should stop, because I said, I have tapes. Mm-hmm. I said, I don't want to release these, but if I have to prove my truth, then I will. And then again, every article was now I understood that I was going to get pushback from the White House, but not about my character and my honesty anymore. I wasn't putting up with it, because we are all about to go to vote for a president of the United States. We've already had a terrible 4 years. Again, like I said, I was protecting them and so many people in the publishing industry and in our world said, you're still protecting them by not releasing this information. And, some people, it took me, look how long it took me to even say I had tapes. I only taped for my protection, to be able to prove that I am innocent of everything that I have been accused of, but also that she knew everything. They knew everything. So I needed, and for me, it was a good reminder of who they are. Because at the time, I kept saying, she's going to say something. I'm going to get her to say something. I'm going to get her to come out and tell the truth. I believed that I could change her mind. It doesn't work that way in Trump world. And
so what gave you the idea to actually start taping? Because it seems like something everybody does in that White House. Did you get that idea from other people? And are there more tapes that we don't know about?
Well, actually,
is Ivanka taping Melania, and is Melania taping Jared? And
honestly, Michael Cohen's tape of me that was so famously opened up the Southern District of New York's investigation into the presidential inauguration committee was because I was for 2 hours talking to Michael about what was going on in the planet.
Whom you knew previously through.
Yes. Michael and I knew each other for years. Yeah. I mean, years. And, as flawed as Michael is, again, when it comes to what he's done in his job or money, or again, I can't speak to that. It's all wrong. I can't speak to it. But as a human being, he's still a human being, and he has still had to face the music, and he has still been the one person that was also, again, he did things that he shouldn't have done, and I get that, but he's still a human being, and they used him to cover up and give everyone else immunity around Trump, who actually know and have access to the real financials and the real information. They needed a scapegoat at that moment, believe me. And he was that person. Regardless of what anyone thinks or knows, I'm telling you. Michael is at least he's admitting now to the world what he's done and how he did. I didn't even know I've been listening to Disloyal before I went on this podcast. I said to him, I had no idea how bad you were. Like, it felt like I was right. Like, I was like, you are really a bad person and you did bad. Like, he's like,
sure did.
Monsters, right? Yeah. I mean, a monster. But I know Laura, I know his kids. Like, for me, I still have that piece of me in me that's like, I don't know. I relate to Michael because, we sort of said on the show, like, we're bookends. I know Melania the way he knows Donald. That intimacy of those relationships were real. I mean, Michael and I would stand in Trump Tower with Melania. Like, he was very much a part of that group, that family, the inner working.
All right.
So how'd you get the idea to do the tapes?
It's the Southern District. So Michael taped me. He was someone I could commiserate with because he understood the players. So it was, again, at this point in time, he was still using the same, I think, what do you call it? Legal. They were sharing a legal team. He and Trump, joint defense.
Right.
And so I was under grand jury subpoena. I wasn't allowed to say anything. I couldn't tell anyone I was working with the Southern District. So knowing, again, the genius of the fact that, everyone was taping. So what I did is I taped it on my iPad when I was on the phone with her. I didn't even think about taping until we started talking. And I pressed my iPad when I was literally on the phone. So some of the recordings are not great, but I can hear it. So the way it happened actually is she signaled me that Stefan Pasentino, the lawyer from the White House, was going to call me. And this was after, 5 days after the first article came out. And that said, Melania's friend gets $26 million. Mm-hmm. And I said, Melania, what? And she knew every step of the way that I didn't get $26 million. I didn't get $1.62 million. It was a narrative that was given to Maggie Haberman. And I apologize. Again, New York Times, they messed up. The first article had already come out and she said nothing.
Yep.
Even though she knew, again, she said there's a possible PIC investigation. So our attorneys have told us that I can't comment. I said, but Melania. So they already knew there was an investigation going on. She's telling me this. So that was on the 15th, the article comes out. On the 20th, I get this signal from her telling me Stefan's calling me. Now, in between all of that, we knew what was going on, that things were heating up, and we knew that was happening actually back in October. Mm-hmm. Melania and I were very well aware that a plan was being made before the release of the finances. So on the 15th, the article comes out. On the 20th, I get a phone call from Stefan. Then Melania was calling me while I was talking to him, and he very adamantly said, I just want you to know, all gratuitous service agreements and contracts like yours are being terminated. And this is when Jared Kushner and Rob Porter were having issues with security clearances. So they ended certain types of contracts. The lawyer literally says, this has nothing to do with the PIC. You did nothing wrong. That, on and on and on.
Yeah.
Again, that phone call afterwards when Melania and I spoke, after the lawyer kept bringing up the fact that this has nothing to do with the picket, I said, Melania, and he kept saying, the White House will say no comment. We're not going to comment on your role here. We're not going to say what you did and didn't do. And I'm like, and I actually said, I can't, why wouldn't you? Explain to me after all this time, after all the work, you're not going to comment? Again, they needed to tie me to the story. And it was the way, and again, I told the lawyer everything that had gone on, or like a few months earlier.
But so
sorry. So then Melania and I speak. And as I'm speaking with her, already having spoken with the lawyer and knowing that I'm being terminated, and that the next story that was going to come, I said, Melania, they're going to make it look like I was fired. And they kept saying, no. This was in the lead up. I said, they're going to make it look like I was fired. They're going to do something. And that's exactly what they did. And Melania told me to not be so dramatic. She said, seriously, you weren't fired. Don't be so dramatic. Those were her exact words. I said, Melania, I just spoke to Stefan. He's terminating the agreement. She goes, this came to that because of politics. And Donald, the White House, the Presidential Inauguration Committee, and she didn't say it. She said they had to just agree to it, that was going to be the story. So when I was on the phone with her, I pressed record. And from that time on, I continued to record our conversations. I don't feel any remorse doing it. I do feel remorse releasing it. I'm just being like, it was my way of proving my innocence. So
you felt pushed to release it. In other words, you felt that
not only the attack on me, but after that debate, I felt like, why am I protecting them? I mean, shouldn't the country know how she really feels? Shouldn't people understand that she really doesn't care? Shouldn't people know that she wore the jacket to get the media's attention because she would not have been covered otherwise in the press, liberal or not? Shouldn't people know that if she's not going to get press coverage, again, the media spinned it a little that, but she said what she, no. It's all not about, it's not the intent of doing good for the intent of wanting to do good. It's the attention that you get from doing something good. Very big difference of intent and attention. And that is Melania's world. She doesn't just do it. This is something Danielle and I were wondering about is,
I remember when I was profiling her and I went through her entire Instagram, my God, and it was all like every other photo was, me getting ready for Red Cross Gala, me getting ready for this charity event, March of Dimes, like hashtag whatever. But it sounds like she was as cheap as the Donald when it comes to philanthropy.
So the Red Cross Gala. So again, at the time I didn't know. I did a deep dive into Melania. And it's interesting to see the correlation and relationship between her involvement or Donald's involvement in the charitable organization that she is either being honored by, hosted by, or present at, and the title and the awards that have come out of it. It's a fascinating story that I think should continue another day because it's mind-blowing. But they never wrote a check to any charitable organization that I'm aware of. Melania always gave a round of golf to one of the Trump resorts. She always gave. That's
free for their point of view.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in her mind, no effort. It's the same thing with the orchid that I was talking about earlier, right? That I would get a birthday present from her that every year I got that white orchid. Now, did I appreciate the present? Yes. But was it from her heart? Maybe we weren't talking about this, and I apologize, but I was thinking about it earlier. It's because I was so amazed that, I couldn't even get myself out the door, let alone remember someone's birthday. Every year I got that white orchid, but it wasn't because it was on her calendar and she had an assistant make sure that the orchid showed up at my house. Yeah. I mean, that's the reality of it. And that's who Melania is.
She sounds kind of like a sociopath, I have to say.
But that's who Donald is.
Right.
But Donald, we know, is a sociopath. Is Melania a sociopath?
I honestly don't want to diagnose her But I do have to say to you that I am more concerned about the well-being of the generations that we're leaving here than not releasing those tapes. She is not someone who values anyone's anyone. She doesn't. These tapes need to be heard because the lack of forget about character and integrity and all the things you need to have. The lack of
empathy.
The lack of empathy.
Does she have it for her parents? For her, is there anyone she does have it for?
Well, there are moments where you'd think she does, right? There are moments where I did. I really did feel that she did care. There were times where, especially in the White House, really when we were that close together all the time, she cared. She was like, you've got to get a lawyer. You've got to release your papers. She wanted me to, but she, again, is it easier said than done with her? She says it, but she never follows through with anything. It's the same thing with everything.
Sounds like Donald. Yeah.
Well, right? I know you've been so generous with your time. I have one more question, and thank you for hanging in here. What happens? Whether it's November 4th or January 2020 or 21 or 4 years from now, what happens when she eventually does return to New York?
What happens to her or everybody else?
What happens to her and her life? I don't think Anna Wintour is going to be worrying about what she's wearing to the Met Gala, for example.
Yeah. Melania and Donald are not going to be making it to the Met Gala anytime soon. So I think that's the least of our worries. I think that, the fact that she could stay here in New York the first 6 months of the presidency and the amount of security and what it took away from everybody else's time, energy, and understanding that she is now going to be the First Lady of the United States, or she was the First Lady of the United States, it didn't matter to her. None of these things matter. And I know I'm not answering your question 100%, but I think it's really important to know, I remember driving in her motorcade on one of our return trips from DC to New York. And she's like, oh my God, look at, because they shut everything down. It's amazing. Yeah. Right. It's incredible. I have to tell you, when I was in it, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Yeah. But you do, afterwards, when you get out and I started walking home, I was like, this just put the whole city everyone had to stand still, oh my God. And then she brought up to me, later that, the New Yorkers must be going crazy because she's staying there. And I was like,
in a good way or a bad way?
In a I don't care way. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't about, for me, I wasn't thinking about the money and the cost of it. I was thinking of what's the word I'm looking for? The
inconvenience.
Thank you.
What you're saying is she won't care. She'll go back to her terrarium, as it were, Julia. She'll go back to her glass
gilded
tower and not care that the invitations aren't flowing.
No, I think that, Melania's plan originally was to come back, and she was planning on redecorating, Trump Tower. I don't think they're coming back to New York, right? They've now made their residence in Florida. But, Melania, I think Melania could see herself in the south of France on a yacht. Honestly.
Will they have enough money for that?
I don't know what they're going to have.
and Ivanka was part of the social, much more social than they were in that sense. What happens to Ivanka and Jared? Do they get
Ivanka and Jared should be so ashamed of themselves. Honestly, they should have never come to DC. I'm sorry. I honestly believe that had they stayed in New York, that our country would be in a different place today, because that's a whole nother story. So anyway, to answer your question, I really don't know how to answer that question. I don't think that they care. I just think that they'll, again, this family has this audacity, this egotistical belief that they are greater than everyone.
They have great genes.
But it's like
they don't get
the best. The best, right? You know what I'm talking about? It is social. It's like, are you in reality? They're in their own reality, in their own world, and I don't think they care what anybody thinks or says.
Well, I wonder though, about the narrative of, can they go back to New York? There's a part of New York that doesn't care if you're a bad person. Like if you have money and if you have status and you're the former.
Money is all key, right? Like that's the thing.
Right. But what I'm saying is if they come back with money and her, whatever consulting fee she had, I think there's a big section of New York that doesn't care about your moral character.
Right.
Anyway.
I don't know. I mean, they are so corrupt. I don't know if the world can really be okay with that extent of just.
I think they could, but I think the problem is we're not really sure how much money they're coming.
Right. And that's the thing too, right? It's like, but listen, we know that they've enriched themselves. I mean, that's a fact. And at least the kids, right? So as far as Donald's concerned, I mean, I think, who knows? I mean, this investigation, the investigations that are going on, I think it's more important for him to stay in the presidency so he doesn't get locked behind bars. And I don't think that there's a dead end to all of this. I do believe that justice will be served. I really do. At some point.
COVID's trying its hardest.
Yeah, right. I mean, and so, but it's like the reality is that they seem, what's the word? Like they, indestructible or untouchable. There's enough, I pray, good in the world that they will have to answer to many of their misdeeds, and the kids too.
Okay, fascinating. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. It is a fascinating read. If you wanted to be a fly on the wall of the White House, not Mike Pence's hair, but on the White House, your book really, you are there for those first 18 months or however long you were there. It's fascinating. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Really, thank you. And I appreciate it. And it was really great to be with you both today.
Thanks. Okay, Julia, what did you think of that?
Wow. I don't know. I think it's just fascinating how many people, how good the Trumps are at manipulating and they're so good at spotting kind of the weakest link and letting that person kind of manipulate themselves into helping them and soil themselves and
be ruined. I mean, she was very at tears describing, he talks about 2 years overcoming it. And it's easy to say, oh, well, you should never have gone there. But I can also see, and there was something also we raised briefly, Pygmalion idea, but you could see how important these child causes were to her. And she'd been involved with them from her own children and family issues.
Right.
And thinking, driving like, oh, finally, I have my chance too, to really put a spotlight on, and then being frustrated that Melania she really doesn't care, do you? And
but it always being like just a touch out of reach. Like if I just wait a little longer, if I just push a little harder, if I work a little more, then it'll happen, or she'll say it, or I'll get what I've been working toward.
Right.
And they seem really good at stringing you along. I kind of felt bad for her.
I did too. And I began it less sympathetic, especially about the recordings. I mean, she's been like, what kind of friend records you and then releases it? And you think, well, if your life has been destroyed by your so-called friend, your reputation, and they're throwing you under the bus in order to preserve themselves, I guess a very, very good friend would not do that. But on the other hand, I understood her need to clear her reputation.
Yeah, I don't condemn her for that. I don't think I was ever on maybe it's the journalist in me. I'm like, great tapes, give them to me. But I think if anything, it shows like the return of her sanity, that she realized, what she had gotten herself into, and that this was no friend, and that, this was going to be her lifeline, or her only way to prove her innocence. Fuck it, tape away.
Well, and you also come away from it realizing, I was struck. I mean, I have no particular fondness for Ivanka and have shared the sort of similar horror of how this family is acting like some 19th century, 18th century French family, that it's an oligarchy and kids should have roles. And yeah, Ivanka should take over the first lady's role. And I get why one would bristle at that. But on the other hand, she just seemed to be mad when Ivanka won or tried to.
Melania, not Stephanie.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Melania when Ivanka tried to step on a first lady role that Melania had shown no interest in at all. It was more like a turf war than like, how dare Ivanka? Sorry, you do the accents way better, but you are very gifted at these accents. But how could Ivanka think that she could do this? It's the job of the first lady. It's like, well, you're not really showing that you want to do this or showing any initiative. You just seem to want to do it because it's supposed to be a first lady role, but you don't actually seem invested in it.
Or it seemed to me from what Stephanie was saying that it's something that, your appetite comes while you're eating, or while someone else is eating.
Is that a Russian proverb? It sounds.
It is. I have a lot of them. But in this case, her appetite came when she saw somebody else eating. She had no interest in it. She wanted to live her glamorous, pampered life, and then she saw Ivanka doing it, and it sounds like she thought, well, that's kind of nice. I want to do that too. And why is this bitch doing it? I'm sorry, I have such a potty mouth. But
right. Well, she also, we didn't get into the story where at the inaugural, where Stephanie helped with this, that they maneuvered the camera angles or the seating so that in the camera, Ivanka would be blocked by Melania. And that was very deliberate. And Melania was delighted by it. Like, it's a sick place. Oh my God.
I know. But I also, to be honest, going into it and having seen a little bit of that world, having worked at Condé Nast back at, during the Bush boom,
right.
It's just that world was so vicious and backstabby and
right,
superficial.
Worse, right? Like the stories of the Vogue offices under Anna Wintour sound terrifying.
Yeah. And you saw it, even just in the cafeteria. And that world always struck me as just like, why would anybody want to be there? It's all superficial. It's all about these weird flexes of power that don't really mean anything. And it seems like going from that world into the White House world was in some ways like a natural transition. But that somebody who was so fluent in that world, even that person gets completely overwhelmed and just trashed is like, shows you how especially toxic this White House is and Trump world is.
Well, anyway, I think a few minutes to recover for that one. Thank you, Julia. Thank you for joining. You were just like an amazing co-splainer, and you were there to zero in on the topic. While my mouth hung open.
Thank you so much for having me, Danielle. That was super fun.
All right. Well, hope to have you back. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye. The Femsplainers is a weekly podcast carried on the Ricochet Network and available pretty much on every podcast platform. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and watch video of our interviews on YouTube. You'll find links to everything, plus how to contact us directly at femsplainers.com. We survive and depend on your support. Like the show? Consider donating as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/femsplainers and get our exclusive monthly bonus episode, Last Call, in which you get to join the conversation with our guests. And there's much more. And a big shout out of thanks to our audio and video editor, Nat Frum.